So this is the Porsche 718 GT4, and it's an entry-level GT car from Porsche. I think it's one of the best modern sports cars out there today. I think it's been so ever since the first generation of the Cayman GT4 was released back in 2015, then based on the 981 model. But we're going to talk a little bit about the car, then we're going to take it out for a drive on this episode of Wheels and Toys. So when Porsche moved from the 981 to the 718 platform, they also removed all of the 6-cylinder engines. It was not until we saw the GT4 and the Spyder being introduced back in 2019 essentially, that we saw the flat 6 engines getting back into these cars, as they were so sought after in the 981 models. But we later also saw the 4-liter engine that's in this car being transferred into the 4-liter GTS models, though it's slightly detuned. But this car has been loved and sought after, and they will continue to be so. Because right now, as this being recorded, the rumors and all these reputations on the internet are saying that actually the model line of the GT4 and the Spyder has ended. There's just a couple of slots left, and allegedly they're all spoken for. So if you are lucky enough to be able to have one of those allocations, or if you can get one of those last ones that are right now at the dealers, be sure you will not be disappointed. So if that's actually true, that means there are a couple of more sort of production lines for the 718 with a naturally aspirated engine before it's going fully electric in 2024-25. Might mean that there's still a couple of production slots for the 4-cylinder engine until that moves into electric, but if these rumors are right, then there's not going to be many of these cars produced, and after that, the 718 with any combustion engine is going to be dead. So you can expect these prices to, if not go up, at least stay quite firm. So if you are thinking of getting one of these, I think now is the right time. Then you'll be able to enjoy them for a couple of years if you want to, or forever, with the value being quite fixed. So what is it that makes the 718 and especially the GT4 model such a great car? So the 718 is the entry-level model from Porsche. It's their smallest car. But it's actually, if you compare the GT4 model to the 997 generation of the 911, to the GT3 of that generation, this car is actually 3 centimeters longer. So even if it's the smallest car today, it's the same size as one of the most loved generations of the 911. I actually think the 718 has sort of taken that place as the really engaging sports car, while the 911 has moved on to being more of a GT cruiser. Unless, of course, you're getting the GT3 or the GT3 RS, which are really like aggressive cars today. But there's also the platform 718 versus the 911. So the 718 is a mid-engine car. So the engine sits roughly around here with the gearbox behind it, just in between the rear wheels. That makes for a perfect weight distribution, but it also makes this car having a longer wheelbase than a 911. So the 911 has its engine in the back with the gearbox in front of it, meaning the rear wheels are going to be pushed further inwards. That also means the front wheels are going to be doing the same thing. Actually, if you look at the 992 generation, the current generation of the 911, that car is a bit more, I think it's 12 centimeters longer than this one, but the wheelbase is actually shorter. So if you're having a bigger wheelbase, you're having a smaller car, you still get that stability and all that stuff, but you're getting the feeling of a bigger car in a smaller package. So I think that is one of the things that most people actually tend to forget with the 718, is that it's just as big or small as the 997 and just as nimble, but it gets that little bit longer wheelbase, which I think you can really feel when you drive it. But there's more things than that to the GT4. So you get all of this with a longer wheelbase and all that stuff from any 718 model. But what makes the GT4 so special? I think there's 4 main things that makes the GT4 really stand out from the 718 range. First, it's the suspension. In the front, it borrows its suspension from the 991.2 GT3. That was the GT3 of the time. It was way before the 992 was, of course, introduced, so it doesn't get that car's new tricky front suspension. In the rear, it gets a bespoke setup to match the front with helper springs, very similar to what you would get from the 992 GT2 RS. So the second thing would be the brakes. So they are also borrowed from the 991.2 GT3. That means 380mm discs in the front and the same in the rear. We got 6 piston calipers in the front and 4 piston calipers in the rear. But you could also option this car with the PCCBs, the ceramic composite brakes. But those are almost 10,000 euros extra. And even though they are, amazing, I'm not sure I could rectify that as a 10% premium on these cars. If I would get the GT3, I think I would think about it a little bit differently, given that that car's price is almost twice of the GT4. And that car is also heavier. So remember, the GT4 is smaller, it's a lighter weight, but it has the same brakes as the GT3. This car has the steels, as you can see. You get the red calipers, you get the yellow calipers for the PCCBs, but both can be optioned with black calipers for around $1,000 extra. So I don't think you need the PCCBs for these. Most people will just drive these cars on back roads where the steels is going to be more than enough. The next thing will be the aero. So in the front we get this very aggressive front bumper with this quite big GT4 embroidered sort of lip. Underneath here we also get a pattern that will help channel the air into the brake ducts and accelerate air underneath the car. That looks a little bit similar to how a golf ball is formed with those little pimples in it. And this big splitter here, which is scraped not by me but by someone else, is of course built so if you scrape it, it's quite cheap to replace it, as these cars does not come with a front lift. But you need this big lip here for what you got in the back. So if we move on to the back of the car, there's 3 things to point out. First, this massive rear wing, which is bigger than the 981 generation, that now has fixed sort of end plates, which I also think looks better. Second one, you get this fixed rear wing, which is bigger than on the non-GT4 models, but it's also fixed. It doesn't go up as the other cars do. Then you get this massive diffuser. So something we've seen on all GT cars except for the GT4 is a central exhaust. But as the GT4 shares its underpinning and everything with the 718 Spyder, when they developed that car, since it doesn't have the fixed wing, they needed to work on other parts of the aero. So when they did the work on that, they came up with this sort of almost like a Venturi tunnel. So the rear diffuser then has this piece in the middle which is functioning to sort of pull the car downwards. So that came from the development of the Spyder, but also then got carried over to the GT4. That means we now have these 2 exhausts a little bit separate, and you can also see actually underneath here that the exhaust is flat, and that's part of the underbody aerodynamics. So really smarter Porsche, even though I would have loved to have both exhausts in the middle. I think it looks better. And the last thing being the engine. So when Porsche transferred from the 981 model to the 982 model, or the 718 as we know it, they ditched the naturally aspirated 6-cylinder engines in the Cayman and Boxsters. Instead, they moved to a 4-cylinder engine with turbos. You either got a 2-liter engine in the base or the 2.5-liter engine in the S and the GTS models. Even though those engines has a lot of grunt, it doesn't have that same urgency and immediacy as was loved in these small cars. But when the 718 GT4 and Spyder were introduced, we also saw the return of the naturally aspirated 6-cylinder engine to the Porsche sort of small car segment. And they were loved for doing so. We since then got the 4-liter GTS which of course also has this same engine. So the GT4 and the Spyder, and the other ones of course as well, has a 4-liter naturally aspirated 6-cylinder engine. And just listen to that, it's 4 liters. It's a huge engine for such a small car. Back in the end of the cycle of the 997, we saw the first 4-liter flat 6 in Porsche. And we were like amazed. It's at 500 horsepower and it was this crazy car, and the values for those are still, I mean, you can never, or at least I can never afford one. But the GT3 that came after that in the 991 generation, the second model of that, got a 4-liter as well. You might think that it's the same engine that goes into the GT4 and Spyder, but it's not. Instead, this one is based on the sort of 3-liter turbocharged engine that goes in the 992, what Porsche call the Evo. But it's then have a bigger bore and stroke, taking it to 4 liters. It doesn't have the turbos, but when you talk to Porsche, they will also tell you like it's not the same engine at all. There's so many parts being changed that essentially it is a bespoke engine. We knew when we saw the GT4 and Spyder that we would see that engine in more cars, and shortly after, of course, the GTS models followed. But I would think that you will soon see that engine in more cars. I even think the 992.2 generation will get this engine, but with a hybrid powertrain as well, but no turbos. We'll see if I get that right. In that case, I think it will be a great car. So the 4-liter engine in this car, it also revs to 8,000 RPMs, 200 RPMs more than the GTS models. And most likely it could take some even more revs if you would want to. We see from Softronic, they, for example, push these to 8,200 without any real issues. You could also get the 718 GT4 and Spyder with either a 7-speed PDK or a 6-speed manual. This one is a manual, and I think it's the way to go. Why? We will talk about more in other videos. But I would say that's enough, right? Let's take it out for a drive. So when you drive the GT4, immediately when you get in, you get that feeling of this being a special car. Everything from the noise or the mechanical sounds of the engine to the stiffness, but still very sort of compliant chassis. And you can get the GT4 in virtually, I mean, any kind of spec you want to have in the inside of the car. You can get the comfort seats, you can get the 18-way sport seats, still comfort seats, or you can get these, the bucket seats, often talked about as the 918 seats, as they were introduced with the 918 Spyder. But if you're getting a GT4 and you want to track it, you're going to want to track it, I would definitely recommend that you get these seats. They're a pain to get in and out of, but they are really comfortable once you are seated in them. And if you're getting a used Spyder, you could also get those sort of folding buckets. But as I had those in my Spyder, and now having these, I would say these are so much better. So you can get your GT4 in whatever spec you want, depending on if you're gonna go for long road trips, just a Sunday drive, or a pure track tool. And if you're looking to get that more raw feeling, you should get the buckets. You can also get the Club Sport package, which this car has. It gets you the roll cage, it gets you 6-point harnesses for the driver's seat. You can option it for the passenger as well, which this car actually have. You also get the fire extinguisher on the passenger side. From stock, you also get the Alcantara steering wheel and the Alcantara shift knob, which gives a little bit more of a racy feeling. But that's not the big thing, right? It's this. It's the engine. And inside of the GT4, with the Cayman chassis, I would say, there's no way to escaping the noise of that intake. It's all about the intake noise. So many people have said like the OPF versions of these, it's ruined in terms of the sound. It's not. Everyone just likes something to complain about. Sure, on the outside, it's not anything near as good sounding as the 981 models, but you're not getting that on any of the modern cars today. But this one, I mean, just listen to it. Let's drop down a gear, we have auto blip on, and push it like 8,000 RPMs. I mean, I don't know if you need more sound than that, but sure, we're still mounting the Akrapovic stuff. Hopefully you're picking this up. It's not the maniac sound of the GT4 RS, but it still sounds good. And it's such a, it embodies the whole feeling of that engine. You're snug in the seats, you got a perfect pointy steering, and you have this wonderful 6-speed manual gearbox. You should really get one of those, unless you really want to track the car. Sure, the GT4 with the PDK is going to be quick around the track, but you're going to have much more fun in a manual car. Out here on these tiny roads, it's just marvelous. It's just marvelous. It's so much fun. We're on winter tires today, so we can't push it fully, but you can just tell that this, with the Cup 2s or with the sort of the Dunlops, if you're unlucky to get those, it's just going to stick to the road. I don't know what to say. It's such a great car, and it just gives you that feeling of the occasion of driving something special. And it is a special car. I mean, it's not cheap, but I would say it's worth the money. But it's such a fun little toy. There's a lot of sound or noise from the road. I mean, you get that from all the 718s. But the pointiness in the steering, the exactness of the gearbox, and just the whole engagement of this car. Let's pick it down a bit so you can hear my voice maybe while talking. So the GT4, if we were to compare this to the Spyder, it feels like a completely different car, but it's not, right? It's the same chassis, it's the same, based on the same car from start. Remember, the Boxster was the first, and then came the Cayman. So the Boxster is sort of the basis of what everything is built on. And the GT4 sort of course, is the ultimate of the Caymans. It's the most playful, it's the most powerful at this point. Of course, the GT4 RS, that tops that, but it's a very special car, and there's very few out there. And if you're lucky enough to even drive one of those, congrats. I would definitely like to try one. It has those extra 1,000 revs and the pure craziness of the GT3 engine, and of course almost 100 extra horsepower. That's plenty. But we're not going to reach that far, but we are going to get some more power to this. For you who has followed me and seen the 718 Spyder I used to have, I've actually sold that, and I'll tell you more about that in the next video. But I sold it, I bought this instead to be able to do this kinds of things, driving even though it's actually really cold outside. So you could see in the first part of the video I wore gloves, and that's because it's super cold. Right now I can be back in the car, enjoy the roof, enjoy the drive, and enjoy the sound. I actually think we'll stop it there before I get too many people that are angry at me and before I lose my license. See you back at the parking spot. So that's it, the Porsche 718 GT4. I think it's an amazing car, and I actually think it's a real bargain if you look at the Porsche lineup. So you're getting a GT car, fully spec'd, 420 horsepower, 430 Newton meters of torque, 8,000 RPMs, and a naturally aspirated engine. You get the suspension setup from a GT3, even with the brakes. And you're paying less than a base sort of zero spec'd 992 Carrera, not even an S. And it's half the price of the 992 GT3 if you're lucky enough to be able to get one at MSRP, which most people won't be able to do. So, I mean, for the package and what you're getting, it's a no-brainer. But if you are thinking, just as me, to get one, do so before it's too late. So this, it's gonna stay with me in my garage. You need to find your queen, and I also encourage you to drive it whatever the weather is. As you can see here, it's actually only 2 degrees outside. We still have snow, and that's why the viewers who've seen a lot of these GT4 videos would have noticed that we are not running the stock wheels. These are the wheels out of a 991.1 4S. So we'll talk about that more in another video. But until I see you next time, if you like this kind of content and you want to see the mods and upgrades that were going on the Spyder that's now going on this, don't forget to subscribe. And until I see you next time, take care.